Good day, friends. This is Martin Comtois, and I'm joined with Ina, and we're doing our sixth episode of Aeon, phenomenology of studies into the phenomenology of the self. Got it out. How are you doing, Ina?
I'm doing great, Martin. I am sincerely grateful for this series. Sincerely, especially what kind of impact it is doing on my own psyche and what kind of ripple effect it creates. And I sincerely hope that all our readers can jump on the wagon and perhaps put that Aion book in their hands, wondering why Martin and Ina are doing this and what exactly.
Well, this next chapter here that we're doing is as a really big impact in astrology, and it shows how profound Jung understood astrology, and we're going to be dealing with some very important aspects of this work. But so far in our journey through Aeon, if we summarize for our viewers who haven't tuned in yet, there's 5 other videos. The first video was on the ego, and that was a brief description of the ego. Then the second chapter was on the shadow, right? And it's interesting, that's the one that's been the less viewed so far. and, then and then there's the syzygy, anima and animus, which is fascinating work. And then we have the self, chapter 4, and then chapter 5 was Christ as a symbol of the self. And now we are dealing with the sign of the fishes. So, in the overview so far, what are your main realizations, or is that something that you can really do?
I think that what are my main realizations? It's a hard one for me to answer at this moment, Martin. What I can tell you is that every time we touch this sacred text, as I call it for now, it does its own magic, and by taking me even deeper than what I thought and understood. It doesn't matter, even the shadow work. I personally have been doing shadow work for the past 6 years, and now you and I have been working for over 2 years now. We're getting closer to 2 years working together. And the depth where this book has taken us so far is quite fascinating, and then the ripple effect that it's creating in our life and our own inner work. So I think that would be my deepest reflection as to what these series have done for me, that it forced me to A, read the chapters of the book, B, deepen the seriousness of the work that it's actually triggering in me.
Is the language becoming easier for you to read?
Oh, for sure. Oh, for sure. This one, the last one that we're doing now, it was almost like a breeze. It's kind of, my mind already got used to it, and it can really process it much easier. And as I said to you, like on last Sunday, yesterday, I was reading the Memories, Dreams, and Reflections, and for me, that also went like butter. There was nothing that I had to reread a few times or slowed myself down. No, I was going very quickly, and my mind was keeping up with it and resonating and embodying the information.
It
For
takes
sure.
a bit of time to get into the groove, and then when you study the more scientific texts, it's a little bit more, especially is deep, profound psychological work
Sure.
requires. But Aeon is nice, and just to summarize again the value of Aeon. So Aeon comes at as volume 9, number 2. So only one of the volumes has 2 parts. And so the volume 9 has 2 parts. Part 2 is Aeon. And there are 18 volumes in Jung's collected works. And so 9.2 is the middle point, and it really marks a huge shift in Jung's work. Jung becomes much more, how should we say? You could say mystical, or more like the first 9 volumes defined his academic work. The next 9 volumes become much more commentary like on the scope of his studies. And volume 9, Aeon, was written in as a book in itself. A lot of the collected works are collections of different essays on a particular subject, whereas Aeon is actually a book that Jung wrote as a one piece, and that's why it's printed separately. And there's an ongoing case. It's like a thesis. And the thesis starts with the basics aspects of Jungian psychology. So we looked at the ego, the shadow, the syzygy, anima and animus, and the self. These are the basic ideas of the philosophy, and he summarizes them basically. So it's a really good book to learn those basics, but you kind of have to read, at least volume 7, 8, and 9 to really fully understand. And then these 4 chapters are kind of summaries. And then the Christ as a symbol of the self, now it becomes kind of a socio or mystical religious commentary. Now he introduces, kind of a commentary on the social, on the evolution of the human spirit through the age of Pisces. And so then for an astrologer, that work is very, very significant. And in that work, and especially in this chapter here, he reveals to us how profound his understanding of astrology is. And we collected through some quotes that we're going to go through, and it's by no means the whole chapter itself, but at least it will give you a good idea of the content.
Yes, it definitely a short synopsis of the chapter, and it is definitely a good summary of what Jung is trying to portray in that specific chapter. And I agree with you. Starting with this book is a bit of a challenge. Definitely, you need to go back in the series to get to this book specifically. But nevertheless, listen, if one is ready and willing to put in the work, let's do it.
Well, I think that this book is probably easier to read than some of the other ones. But well, like you were saying about how Jordan Peterson says you want to go into psychosis, you read that book. Didn't you say that to me?
Yep.
So here you go. Did you go into a psychosis through this?
Yeah.
People ask me, it says, "Are you psychic?" I says, "No, I'm psychotic."
Exactly. And I'm okay with it, right?
Well, it's a much healthier perspective. I think that one must realize the split in one's soul to really make progress on the spiritual path, and so identification with the archetype versus understanding that that we are in service to the archetype, and so that to call ourselves psychic it's much, I always keep myself humble and say, no, I'm psychotic. which really can relate much better.
Mm.
Okay, so here we go. We're gonna start with the first slide and the second slide. So we got conversations with Ina and Martin, C.G. Jung's Aion, researches into the phenomenology of the self. Chapter 6, the sign of the fishes. And the first, so this is boom, Mr. Jung himself in his study. I do not regard the symbol as an allegory or a sign, but take it in its proper sense as the best possible way of describing and formulating an object that is not completely knowable. That's a nice definition of the symbol, huh? Mm, and I think that a big part of learning to work with Jung and to understanding Jung is this understanding of symbol. Jung, volume 18 is called The Symbolic Life, and Jung, volume 5, Symbols of Transformation. And when he explains to us about symbols in his dream analysis work, where he teaches us to recognize what is meant by a symbol. It, in this definition, he says it means so much more than what it represents at face value. Are you starting to recognize how is your symbolic intelligence starting to develop?
It's a journey. It's a journey. It's the journey to think about symbolism in objectively, as you always call me, towards it. And it's not an easy journey, but I also find that, and you've mentioned this before, that it is important for the person themselves to understand what the symbology of the dream analysis actually takes them to. And it has to be a personal relation to the symbol. And one needs to really meditate and activate the active imagination in connection to the with the symbol in order for the true meaning of that symbol really truly speak to that individual themselves. So that is a trial and error for me still. I'm still sort of tapping into her, and of course I have my SOS messages to Martin.
well, it's the key to dream analysis. Really, is this ability to learn to have an understanding of what symbols. And so, in other texts, Jung talks about symbols as having a numinous charge. He uses this Greek word numinous meaning an experience of spirit, of the divine breath. And so a numinous experience, a symbol provides a numinous experience. The symbol is revealed when we go, oh, so for example, the cross. The cross for a Christian is a symbol that has a numinous charge to it. It inspires him, or the beautiful examples of symbols, the yin and yang sign, the Tao, and the and another symbol is the word mother, right? You can look at mother, my mother, but you can look at mother with the capital M, the great mother. Then all of a sudden the word mother becomes a symbol of something that has a numinous charge. And so then in understanding to see the symbol, one has to try to get the symbol to talk to you in the way that it reveals its numinous side.
Mhm.
And that's the symbolic life, to see that actually everything is the voice of spirit.
Exactly.
Fascinating. So
And a communication of the spirit.
absolutely a communication of spirit.
Mhm.
And that's really what we're trying to do in this new age, is to learn to rekindle this symbolic life.
Mm.
So the sudden activation of the symbol and its identification with Christ, even in the early days of the church, leads one to conjecture a second source. This source is astrology.
Mm.
And so, from an astrologer perspective, I always say that I've come to Jung through the back door. And that is that I came to Jung first as an astrologer, wanting to know what Jung could add to my astrology practice. Not only did I approach him from that perspective, but also I'd become an astrologer and I was doing readings, and I realized when I was doing readings that I just didn't know enough about the human soul. And so then I through Liz Green, which was my main astrological teacher, I I was introduced to Jung quite a bit through her work, because she was a Jungian, she is a Jungian analyst herself.
Right.
And so then I was introduced to Jung. But then when I got into doing the work, I says, oh dude, I gotta study Jung. And so then that's when my Jungian study started, and it contributed so much, especially this volume, and also other parts of his work, especially his alchemical work, really reframed completely my astrology. And that's the essence of the healer and the dreamer astrology. Blah, blah, blah. But this is a video series on Aeon, so let's get back to it. I like digressions, as you well
Oh,
know.
but it is important to hear our personal journey in relation, and what truly, if you think about it, going back to what Jung's work has done to your psyche and your development, and how much deeper you went into something as just simply being another astrologer, right? And actually guiding the souls and the psyche of every individual that comes your way. I think it's actually, to me, the ripple effect of someone's work, to take someone who is interested without knowingly, just by reading the work and the language itself, creating such a strong ripple effect for every us, from personal and the collective, is beautiful, sincerely beautiful.
Thank you for that. I spent hours editing the slides, and then the first two slides have two mistakes. So I am human. So it is explained that the house of the fishes is the house of justice and brilliant splendor. And in the text itself, Jung uses astrological symbols. So here we have Jupiter and Pisces. So Pisces is the house of justice and of brilliant splendor. And that is not what you'll find in pop astrology books. And so Jung's vision of astrology is very different, and his studies is rooted in history, and we'll know this really clearly here. Further, that in Anno Mundi 2364, so Anno Mundi is a term, Greek term, saying from the creation of the world. And so the Greeks and the early Christians had this understanding of Anno Mundi 2365, a great, and that is the beginning of the Age of Pisces. So that is equal to about, year one of the Christian era. So that's the Anno Mundi 2365, a great conjunction of Saturn and Jupiter took place in Pisces.
Mhm.
These two great planets, he says, are also the most important for the destiny of the world.
Mm.
It's interesting to note that we just went through in 2020 and 2021 another conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn, this time in the sign of Aquarius, which is interesting. So, let's keep with that. But that's a side note. These astrological, I have lots of videos dealing with that. If you look at my the Astrology of the Great Reset playlist and go back about a couple of years there, you'll see I deal with that conjunction in detail. It's very, very important, the Saturn-Jupiter conjunction, and we'll be studying that more as we go along. And that's why it's so fascinating, this volume, because it actually is, although it's a psychological exploration, it is also deeply astrological. So it's actually an astrological thesis. And that's why we're doing it on, first in our work, is because it's so astrologically relevant.
Mhm, mhm.
These astrological ideas are quite understandable when one considers that Saturn is the star of Israel, and Jupiter means the king of justice. The Sabbath is Saturday, Saturn's day. Even Christmas was known as Saturnalia before the time of Christ. So in medieval astrology, Saturn was believed to be the abode of the devil. Saturn is a black star, accidentally refuted as maleficus. So in astrology, Saturn is known as a malefic planet. So then let's continue. According to medieval tradition, the religion of the Jews originated, and from an astrological perspective, you're reading through this thesis, and all of a sudden Jung is waxing eloquently about astrology. And so if you have a basic understanding of astrology, studying Jung will shift your understanding of astrology to a more alchemical and ancient perspective, which I found very valuable. So originated in a conjunction of Jupiter with Saturn, that's the religion of the Jews. Islam, a Jupiter conjunction with Venus. Christianity, Jupiter conjunct Mercury, and the Antichrist and Jupiter conjunct the moon. Unlike Saturn, Jupiter is a beneficial star. In the Iranian view, where was I? Oh, one more. No. Okay, in the Iranian view, Jupiter signified life, Saturn death. The conjunction of the two therefore signifies the union of extreme opposites. In the year 7 before Christ, this famed conjunction took place no less than 3 times in the sign of the fishes. From the astrological point of view, this conjunction must appear especially significant because the approximation of the two planets was exceptionally large and of an impressive brilliance. In addition, seen heliocentrically, it took place near the equinoctial point, which at the time was located between Aries and Pisces. That is between fire and water. Let's flesh that out. What is the equinoctial point? Do you know?
No.
So Western astrology is based on the precession of the equinoxes and the solstices. So that means that it's not based on the star constellations like Vedic astrology. It's based on the equinoxes and the solstice being the beginning of the cardinal signs. So we're at the summer solstice now, so the sun is entering Cancer. It's the beginning of summer. But the constellation of Cancer, the stars themselves, they're somewhere, let me see if I get this straight, and you can correct me if I don't, but they would be so 0 degrees of Aries, the beginning of spring, it's actually into Pisces at about 24 degrees of Pisces, the equinoctial point. So the constellation have moved 24 degrees different. So then that means that the 0 of Cancer, according to the constellation itself, has moved into Gemini, you know, but we base ourselves on the movement of the earth around the sun and how we move around the sun, but also as we move around the sun, we kind of spin, but we also tilt our axis. It's kind of like a race car, you know, when you're turning a corner, you know, so you're like, you know, so the earth does a tilting when it goes, and that tilting has it so that in the winter month, the southern hemisphere is most exposed to the sun. And as we come to spring, it's equal. And as we come to summer, the north face shows more. You know, so it goes, so north face is showing more in the winter, in the summer, and then the southern face of the earth is more exposed to the sun. So it has that interesting movement, and we base our astrology according to that movement. And so this is very important. And so then what Jung says here is that the equinoctial point, so the ages, the precession of the ages, the precession of the ages is based on the movement of that point. So as that point, the equinoctial point, so the spring equinox, 0 degrees of Aries, it was just leaving Aries and coming into Pisces. It was a shift of the era, and that conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn was also coming to that point. So you see how important this discussion is astrologically, because we just went through a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. They happen every 20 years. But now the equinoctial point is going from Pisces, and now it's in about 24 degrees Pisces, 25 degrees Pisces, and it's slowly moving into Aquarius. So we talk about the age of Aquarius. So then at the time of Christ's birth, we had that Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, but also right at that conjunction between the Aries era age and the Aries Aeon and the Pisces Aeon. So that's fascinating. Did that make any sense to you?
It makes perfect sense to me. I'm just thinking. So we are drumming into the Aquarius age as of literally right now.
Yes, we're gonna, that's the essence of this chapter, and we're gonna go more into more details with this as we go along, but I just wanted to take a little break there to
No, it was very clear, especially the equinoxian rhythm. That's something very interesting. Reminded me of a little bit of a shadow work and how we tilt ourselves. And but anyway, I don't want to.
No, that's good. That's good. That's good. So then the equinoctial point, which at that time was located between Aries and Pisces, that is between fire and water. The conjunction was characterized by the important fact that Mars was in opposition. So here's Mars opposite Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, which means astrologically that the planet correlated with the instinct stood in a hostile relationship to it, which is peculiarly characteristic excuse me, of Christianity. That's fascinating, isn't it?
It is, truly is, especially what he was able to pinpoint and how he correlated all of that with astrology and what it meant. Alchemical.
Well, one of the things you understand as you start studying Jung is that Jung was a teacher and he was a psychologist. He called himself a scientist of the soul.
Mm-hmm.
But he was a passionate, he left us a tremendous amount of body of work. But his studies and his library and his understanding of the human soul's evolution and the depth of his understanding, it's like reading Jung is like reading the history of the modern evolution of the soul through
Sure.
the ages.
Yes,
It
yes.
is fascinating how he introduced you with different individuals, mystics that had influences and what they did to the evolution of these ideas in a way where you can look back at the history of human evolution from a perspective of the 20th and 21st century, and from the perspective of a psychologist whose business it is to heal people of neurosis and psychosis. So, it's like, wow. And that's the second part of his work is so relevant in that way, and that he helps you look at your own evolution, but also into the root of your psyche, so that you can understand not just yourself better, but also human evolution better.
Absolutely. From personal to collective. Absolutely.
That was fun. Okay, so here we go. And yeah, I'm my own technician, so you have to bear with me. I make lots of mistakes. So this is an alchemical picture drawn out of Jung's work. And so this is Mercurius, or Mercury, in his alchemical work. And here we have the planet Mercury is correlated with Set in Egyptian mythology. And this is interesting in view of the tradition that Christianity originated in the conjunction of Jupiter with Mercury. These astrological statements that were quite possible in antiquity all pointed to the prominent double aspect of the birth that occurred at this particular moment of time. And one can understand how plausible was the astrological interpretation of the Antichrist myth when it entered into manifestation at the time of the Gnostics.
Mm-hmm.
So here, let's have another little digression. The Gnostics. What do you understand about the Gnostics?
I don't know. You go. I'm not gonna.
Do you know anything about the Gnostics?
You go, Martin. I'm listening.
Okay, well, Gnosticism, you heard the word.
Yes, of course.
So Gnostics, like you have the word agnostics, oh, I am agnostics. Well, the word Gnostic means knowledge. So when you say I'm agnostics, you mean I'm against knowledge. So it's a beautiful argument next time somebody says I'm an agnostic. Oh, you're against knowledge. Interesting. So Gnostics, they were these mystics that were in essence Greek philosophers. So it's the interface between Greek philosophy and Christianity, and they approach Christianity from the perspective of Greek philosophy. So,
Okay, sure.
so they were philosophers who looked at Christianity and the appearance of Christ with the lens of Plato and all of those dudes. And there were a number of them that were very powerful in the early days of Christianity. So Gnosticism, 100 years before Christ to about 300 years after Christ, there were some, Origen and some early church thinkers, and there was a great debate at that time between the more well, you can't say orthodox yet, because that's really a term that comes 1,000 years later, but they were much more wanting to look at Christ literally, and they were forming the church, and they didn't like the influence of the Gnostics. And so a lot of the church ideas are in direct argument to what the Gnostics are saying. And then Jung explains later on that the Gnostic ideas take birth again during the Knights Templar and all of these groups of people during the Renaissance and before the Renaissance who were inspired by the Gnostic teachings that came about when not Constantinople, but when the great library in Egypt, what was that? Yes, Alexandria. When Alexandria fell, all of the books from Alexandria came into access. They moved into Europe. And the same thing happened with Constantinople fell. All of the books, so that's the time of the Renaissance, all of these, and so the Renaissance is the rebirth of Greek ideas. But then with the Greek ideas came the Gnostics again, and then Gnosticism became a really big influence. And that text that I was telling you about, the seven sermons to the dead, that is really a Gnostic text. There are churches formed. There's a church in LA, a Gnostic church that's based on that essay and on Jung's work. And some of them, Jung is considered a Gnostic prophet. So
I knew that. Oh my God. I'm so happy I'm listening to you right now. Oh my God.
Well, there's a lot, and so that was so then the Gnostics, this is just kind of context as we go, and to understand Jung's work as a body helps you understand what he's talking about, and that's kind of the role I play, right? Here we go. All right, so boom. So then we talked about into the manifestation at the time of the Gnostics. The year 531 is characterized astronomically by a conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn in Gemini. The sign stands for a pair of brothers, and they have a somewhat antithetical nature. And so then we go back to this precession of equinoxes, and was a fact well known to astrologers of antiquity. this guy Origen. He's a mystical Christian that's quoted a lot in Jung. Origen is the guy who said, all the stars in heavens, they're to be found in you. And it define your character. So he was kind of a Christian astrologer, but also didn't really like it. So, and as we'll look at it, so Origen, helped by the observations and calculations of Hipparchus, uses it as a cogent argument against an astrology based on the so-called morphomata, the actual constellations. So we talked about this earlier. We talked about the precession of the equinox. So Origen, an early Christian scholar, didn't like the fact that we based astrology on the constellation, which is the morphomata. He said it's based on something else. So again, this conversation of astrology and what Jung puts, his studies into, and his studies, his work, is he really helps you mold your astrology in a much, more realistic evolution of the human soul. So so then the astrology is not based on the stars. And then he goes further into saying, so it's not the actual constellation naturally, but in Vedic astrology, it is the actual constellation. So that's the difference between Vedic astrology and Western astrology. I chose Western astrology because of Jung's work. So naturally, this does not apply to the distinction already drawn in ancient astrology between the morphomata and the fictive signs of the zodiac. So there's a relation. So between the signs of the zodiac and the constellations themselves, but really they're separated. If we take the 7,000 years mentioned in the prophecy of Anno Mundi 7,000, the year denoted would be after the disappearance of Christ, 3,239. By then, the spring point will have moved from its present position to 18 degrees into Aquarius, the next Aeon, that of the water carrier. As an astrologer of the 2nd or 3rd century, he would be acquainted with the precession. We may surmise that these dates were based on astrological considerations, and at all events, the Middle Ages were very much concerned with the calculation of the conjunctiones maxima and magnea. So I think now you can understand my excitement of studying Aeon as an actual astrological thesis, because
yes,
it's so fascinating. So then he talks about Jupiter and Saturn, and how Jupiter, the beneficial star, and the king of justice star, and Saturn, the devil, and the star of Israel, and the Christ and the Antichrist myth, as the Antichrist being Saturn, and Jupiter being and that Antichrist Christ myth relates to the difference between Jupiter and Saturn. Now, the next time you look at your chart and you see Jupiter and Saturn, you're going to look at it all differently.
Completely.
Right?
Absolutely. Even now, as I'm listening, when I read it the first time, I was like, I would like to look at my chart again just to understand it a little bit differently. When is my Saturn return? What is happening to Jupiter? What happened where were these planets when I was born? All these questions begins to firing and wiring.
Exactly. Now, our collective consciousness has evolved since then, right? Since the time of this writing. This book was written in the 1940s. So this information has been available, and you have countless people that have taken that information And, and by the 1960s, pop music was singing about the Age of Aquarius. And Jung looks, and basically Jung was the first one to talk about the Age of Aquarius. And here is the scientific information of where he got it. And he says an astrologer of the 2nd or 3rd century was already familiar with this stuff. But then you go into the astrological work right now, and you got to really dig deep to find that. And for me, it really helped me shift my understanding of it, and also understand the significance of Jupiter and Saturn. But then now we look, at Jupiter and Saturn, and our understanding started to shift really in the 70s when Liz Green came up with her book, Saturn, a new look at an old devil. And then that book, Saturn, a new look at an old devil, shifts our understanding of Saturn into a more beneficial role of the devil. And so now we don't look at Saturn as the devil, we don't look at it as the Antichrist, we look at it as the opposite of the Jupiterian inflation, because the Jupiterian, you have to be careful, because Jupiter is all inflated, and can be, the king of justice can be kind of full of himself, and it needs Saturn to balance it out. But then in your own mythology, in your own chart, the role of Jupiter and Saturn really become very, we can get the full role of what they do.
To the core of your existence, for sure.
All right. How are we doing, my dear?
Beautiful. I'm loving it.
And so am I. So then, 18 degrees. As an astrologer of the 2nd, 3rd century would be acquainted with the precession, we may surmise that these dates were based on astrological consideration. At all events, the Middle Ages were much more concerned with the calculation of the conjuncties maxima and magnea. So the conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn are very important time markers in the evolution of the human spirit. That's why I brought it up earlier that we in 2020, 2021, we lived through a conjunction of Jupiter, Saturn, right at 0 degree, 1 degree of Aquarius.
Wasn't this when COVID started? Wasn't this when COVID started?
No, COVID started a little bit earlier in 2020 when Saturn conjuncted Pluto. And then during 2020, Jupiter conjuncted Pluto 3 times. And then as 2020 was ending and 2021 was beginning, Jupiter and Saturn came in together. And we could see them in the sky, just like the birth of Christ, so then we can see, that, so that significance of that, just like the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction at the beginning of the Christian era, we had the Jupiter in Pisces, we had the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in Aquarius. So, that's an interesting way to point and to look at it, but the Jung gets into it more. But that, also if you're born, or if you look at your relationship within Jupiter and Saturn in your own chart, and sometimes a lot of people, if you're born in 2020 or in 2000, around 2000, or in 1980, you have or 1960 or around there, you have a conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn. Or Jupiter and Saturn may be in opposition or in square to each other. So understanding that, very important. So this becomes much more astrological, and that's much more in harmony. But not that the earlier work wasn't fascinating. This is really fascinating as well. So we continue. Pierre Dailly. So Jung studied this guy Cardan and Dailly, French astrologers, early astrologers, of the Renaissance time, Pierre Dailly, reckoned that the first conjunctio maxima after the creation of the world took place in 5027 before Christ, while Cardan relegated the 10th conjunction as AD 3613. But then assumed that the lapse too large an interval between conjunctions in the same sign. The correct astronomical interval is about 795 years. Cardan's conjunction would accordingly take place in the year after that 3234. For astrological speculation, this date is naturally of the greatest importance. So I think we need to unpack that one. So, I don't think I can make complete sense of what that said, but I can read between the lines.
Okay.
And read what you read between the lines is how profound Jung's study of the subject was, and that he had studied many writers. If you go into Jung's library, you see all kinds of really, really old antique books by this guy, Pierre Dailly and Cardan, and all of these incredible, it's like one of the richest mystical libraries in the world. He had Marie-Louise von Franz. Marie-Louise von Franz walked into Jung's Bollingen house. Bollingen was the house that Jung built out of stones himself, did the masonry, and built this tower on the side of Lake Zurich, which is is mystic hermitage, really. And Marie-Louise von Franz came in the mid-30s or a little bit later than that. Can't remember the date exactly, but she came in as a 18-year-old with a class of high school students. And she started working with Jung from that moment on, and did all the research for his alchemical work. And she went all over Europe collecting old manuscripts. And she just collected all of these things, and they built their library together. And then Marie-Louise von Franz is an amazing resource for his alchemy. She is one of the main branches of the Jungian tree that took, and she died, I think, in the late 90s. And the other main branch of the tree is, memory fails me. I can't think of him right now, but there's another American.
For some reason, you mentioned her name again, and my body just had all kinds of trembling responses. Not sure why.
Well, she's the one I pointed that to you.
I know, yes, and I've seen her work, and I've read some of her work. I never dove deep into her, but this was a very different response. But anyway, sorry.
The other main branch of the Jungian tree is James Hillman. James Hillman's work is fabulous, and it takes Marie-Louise von Franz was Swiss, so it's a very different approach to Jung's work. And James Hillman was American, and so and had a huge influence in forming Pacifica University in Santa Barbara, which is kind of the where the American school. Anyway, this is digressions, but also information.
Do you like both of them?
They both were main influences. I got some great stuff, especially James Hillman's early work. But yeah, James Hillman, the Code Soul, and Marie-Louise von Franz. The problem with the Jungians now is they don't study Jung. They study the post-Jungians. And so you can get lost in James Hillman's work, and you can get lost in Marie-Louise von Franz. And Marie-Louise von Franz is much more orthodox, if I may, whereas James Hillman is much more American and much more innovative, and you can be influenced by those two, and you can completely lose track of Jung because their body of work is so huge. So you know, that's something to
It's a
keep track of.
reflection of what their perception of Jung, right?
Exactly, and they, you know, and Mary-Louise von Franz says James Hillman started his own cult. You know, so there's infighting among the followers of Jung as well. So blah 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 blah. The date naturally is of greatest importance. In a sense, therefore, they were modern in their outlook, but they had a religious inflation instead of the rationalistic and political psychosis that is the affliction of our day.
I feel like you right now comparing Marie Monfranc and Hillman, exactly what you just read.
Well, this is actually, no, this is concerning the Gnostics.
Mm-hmm.
And
no, I get it, but again, going from a personal to collective. Mm-hmm.
Right, but the political psychosis that is the affliction of our day, you know, versus the religious inflation. That's kind of the evolution, you know. I mean, it's
Sure.
and there's all kinds of really cool little statements like that Jung makes in terms of, you know, because it's easy for us as rationalistic political psychotics
As we live
to
through it
think
right
that
now.
the religious people that formed our religious traditions were inflated. But we are similarly inflated, and we haven't learned from that inflation. And so Jung points it out in that we need to do that. If, as seems probable, the Aeon of the Fishes is ruled by the archetypal motif of the hostile brothers, Jupiter and Saturn, then the approach of this next Platonic month, namely Aquarius, will constellate the problem of the union of opposites. I'm going to read that statement again because that is so important. Again, it's understated. If, as seems probable, the Aeon of the Fishes is ruled by the archetypal motif of the hostile brothers, you know, and we look at the Age of Pisces and all of the fighting between, you know, that took place under the name of religion, then the approach of the next Platonic month, namely Aquarius, will constellate the problem of the union of opposites. So a lot can be unpacked from that. What do ye hear in that?
I'm trying not to do what Jordan Peterson say and lose my mind.
Well,
honestly, truly.
But that's perfect. It's a confrontation of opposite. What we experience in our culture as the polarization of our culture. What's going on? You know, we are confronted with the resolution of the opposites. Even the woke, you know, philosophies of the union of the masculine and the feminine within one's personality, or choosing one side or the other. The practical fact of the matter is that we all have a masculine and a feminine side, and we can all choose to empower one side or the other. It's to get them to both work together in harmony. That's the challenge. You can overemphasize one side or the other all you want, and you're going to hell one way or the other. It's the confrontation of opposite that's fine. It's the reconciliation of the opposites that makes you really amazing. And that's difficult because we constellate the opposites. And that's, you know, the Aquarian versus Leo, you know. So in the Pisces eras, the opposition was Virgo. Now, as we move into Aquarius, the opposite of Aquarius is Leo. Leo is pure individualism. Aquarius is pure community and idealism of the ideal community. And so if you have a community that doesn't honor the individual, then it's a dictatorship. And if you have an individual that doesn't have a community, then he's very lonely. And so Leo needs Aquarius and Aquarius needs Leo. And so all of this fighting, we have to meet in the middle somewhere and learn to get along with each other. And boom, that's the challenge of the next 2,000 years. That's
but if people misunderstand that whole concept, just like they misunderstood the inflation of the religion during the Christ era, Pisces era, we're pretty much going to go through round 2 just in a different wrapping paper.
well, and it can be experienced right now. You know,
100%. It's almost like we're tipping our toes deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper into the constellation of the opposite rather than the reconciliation of the opposites.
well, and again, we're just beginning, and we get to take our root or our cues from Jung, but how we
Ourselves personally.
Well, and how we comment and guide, and that's the role of astrology, to reconcile the opposite in one's nature.
Absolutely.
If you don't do that work within yourself.
Absolutely. I agree with you 100%. You cannot preach to the others. Absolutely.
But if you don't do the work, then you become inflated with one side or the other, and then you're torn by the opposites, and then really the world is in a state of psychosis because it's torn between two opposites. So that's what Jung's work is that's why Jung's work is becoming more and more important, this reconciliation of opposite. And then we the other day we went through Mysterium Conjunctionis, and how it's all about the resolution of the opposites, and so blah blah blah. I hope our listeners are as excited as we are, because this has been
so this was so juicy. How can it not be exciting?
Please, if you have a comment or a question, or if you like what we're saying, we like feedback.
We do. Let's reconcile those opposites.
A direct astrological aspect of Christ's birth. So the next 3 slides are pretty long, so I'll move through them. But the direct astrological aspect of Christ's birth is giving us in Matthew 2. So this is the biblical confirmation, and basically the whole case of Jung built. This is kind of the biblical proof. The Magi from the east were stargazers, so when we celebrate the 3 kings who brought gifts to Jesus, they were astrologers, beholding an extraordinary constellation of Jupiter and Saturn, inferred an equally extraordinary birth. This anecdote proves that Christ, possibly even in the time of the apostles, was viewed from the astrological standpoint, or was at least brought into connection with the astrological myths. The later alternative is fully confirmed when we consider the apocalyptic. So what is this word apocalyptics? We use this word apocalypse. And it comes out of the Bible, mostly St. John's. What is apocalypse?
The end of something?
It's the end of the world. So then when we talk about the apocalypse, we talk of a Christian concept of the end of the world. Since this exceedingly complex question has been discussed by those who are more qualified than I, we can support argument on the well-attested fact that glimpses of astrological mythology may be caught beyond the stories of the worldly and otherworldly life of the Redeemer. To the extent that Christ was regarded as the new Aeon, it would be clear to anyone acquainted with astrology that he was born as the first fish of the Pisces era and was doomed to die as the last ram of the declining Aries era. I have a very interesting digression for you.
Okay.
This is a book, in your studies, this is a book that you must read at a particular point, and that is Answer to Job.
Mm-hmm.
So this is
I remember this one. Mm-hmm.
So this is kind of the base. This is the basics of where that answer to Job comes from. The answer to Job, Jung takes these ideas we're discussing and takes them a step further. He says that in the Age of Aries, God, the Jewish God, what is he called again? Hello, memory. Yahweh. Yahweh is a very ambivalent, very patriarchal, and kind of like really difficult character. He's an angry God. The God of the Jews is an angry God. And then he's confronted by Job, who says, excuse my French, but what the fuck? Like I did everything and my fate's never shaken, and you've taken everything away from me, and what's going on? And basically Job becomes morally superior to God himself. So then Jung extrapolates from that, and he says, well, at that point, God decided that he must become man in order to understand what Job was feeling. So then Job and this Old Testament stuff of the story of Job is actually the intuition of this Age of Pisces and this conflict of God becoming man and how it affected the relationship between God and man. It's a huge shift. Before that, God was up there, the gods were up there. After that, God became man, and we developed a relationship on a one-to-one basis with God.
Love it.
But then in his work, Jung goes a step further, and he says that in the Age of Aquarius, that conflict of opposites has to be reconciled in the inner God within me. That is both masculine and feminine, the syzygy.
Mm-hmm. Amen.
And that's Jung, that's in a nutshell, Jung's commentary on this evolution that we're all going through.
I know. I know. I love it. Absolutely love it. May it be true.
Shit, what did I do? I gotta go back. Okay, I pressed on the wrong buttons. That's the thing, huh? I don't have a technician, so I'm my own technician, and I really, some people, they say to me,
Absolutely good. And you're most importantly, you are also, don't forget that you're teaching and explaining very, very mystical texts, literally.
it's an amazing job that I have. I love it. And there's gonna come one day, maybe where I'll have support system and we'll edit our videos, but hey man, it's about getting the stuff out there, And so, all right, so I think I've figured out my problem. So now we go to that button, we hit share button, we got, and okay, we're back. Phew. Okay, so did I read this whole time? Doomed to die as the last ram of the declining Aries era.
That's right.
And that was a nice digression. And then here Jung really shows his objectivity. although no connection of any kind can be observed between the figure of Christ and the inception of the astrological age of the fishes. The simultaneity of the fish symbolism of the Redeemer with the astrological symbol of the new Aeon seems to me important enough to warrant the emphasis we place upon it. If we try to follow up the complicated mythological ramification of this parallel, we do so with intent to throw light on the multifarious aspects of an archetype that manifests itself on the one hand in a personality and on the other hand synchronistically. You gotta love that guy. In a moment of time determined in advance before the Christ's birth. So it's an individual, but it was also predicted synchronistically. And this word synchronistically is a scientific concept to define, magic, And so synchronistically, this was predicted before, as Job, and in other texts, Indeed, long before that, the archetype had been written in the heavens by projection. So these archetypes are projected on the stars. That's astrology. So as then, when the time was fulfilled to coincide with the symbols produced by the new era, the fish, appropriately enough, belongs to the winter rainy. Oh, I went too fast here. To coincide with the symbols produced by the new era. So we have a personal God and a personal person taking birth, but we also have an archetypal, collective, synchronistically ordained, there's all kinds of magic associated with that person. And so then we're trying to reconcile the two. The fish, appropriately enough, belongs to the winter rainy season, like Aquarius and Capricorn, the goatfish. As a zodiacal sign, therefore, it is not in the least remarkable. It becomes a matter for astonishment only when, through the precession of the equinoxes, the spring point moves into the sign that does inaugurate an age in which the fish was used as a name for the god who became a man, who was born as a fish, and was sacrificed as a ram, who had fishermen for disciples and wanted to make them fishers of men, and fed the multitude with miraculously multiplying fishes, who was himself eaten as a fish, the holier food, and whose followers are little fishes, the pisculi. So that's Jung's evidence. He says, well, this is what I base all my studies upon, and this is what I've gotten. And did that make sense to you?
Yes, it does. And unfortunately, my mind's right away went into analysis and comparison. How would it show up in the Age of Aquarius? And I had to stop myself. And I did that when I read it the first time on my own. Then I read it again when we were reviewing the slides. And even now you talked about it, and it triggered me by thinking, okay, so if this is the Christ in the era of Pisces and in Aries, and how are we moving to end of Pisces into Aquarius? And I literally had to tell my mind not to go there.
Well, it's very interesting, huh? And I think that we anyway, yeah, that
Well, yeah,
what.
because the mind really wants to, quickly get an understanding, right, and grab on and try to identify with what it sees, and to hold the mind from any kind of misdirection. That's what I call it.
Well, you know, there's a different type of inflation that's manifested, says when we
Sure.
identify too much with the archetype now,
Mm-hmm.
assessed by the archetype, and we think we've become God, or we've become the shaman, or we've become,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and we saw that, we see that inflation in the scientists and the politicians, and we see that
Exactly.
inflation earlier on in the Christians.
Mm-hmm.
So you know, but I think that dialogue and the point that you bring up is the very great mystery of the coming age and the beginning age, and in 2000 years somebody will be writing the history of it, but we're too we haven't even, we're kind of in the birth pangs of it all,
That's
but
exactly what's going on right now. That's how I felt as well. We're literally just at the brim of it.
we're giving birth to a new age and it's
Mhm.
very painful.
Mhm. Mhm.
Let's do the last two slides here. Well, actually, I blew it again. Darn. Uh, what did I do? I pressed the wrong thing, is what I did. Aha, I got it easier this time. All right. So then Jung goes completely different. He like the next paragraph over. He says, well, he makes his point, he makes his case, and he says, assume, if you like, that a fairly widespread knowledge of astrology would account for at least some of the symbolism in certain Gnostic Christian circles, but this assumption does not apply when it comes to eyewitness accounts in the Synoptic Gospel. So he basically says there's no evidence in the Bible of this at all. There's no evidence of any such thing. We have no reason whatever to suppose that those stories are disguised astrological myths. On the contrary, so then you really see he's a scientist, He's like right off the bat, he challenges his own hypothesis. On the contrary, one gets the impression that the fish episodes are entirely natural happenings and that there's nothing further to be looked for behind them. They are just so stories, quite simple and natural. And one wonders whether the whole Christian fish symbolism may not have come out about equally fortuitously and without premeditation. Hence, we could speak just as well of the seemingly fortuitous coincidence of the symbolisms with the name of the new Aeon. The more so as the age of the fishes seems to have left no clear traces in the cultures of the East. I could not maintain with any certainty that this is correct because I know far too little about Indian and Chinese astrology. As against this, the fact that the traditional fish symbolism makes possible a verifiable prediction that had already been made in the New Testament is a somewhat uncomfortable. Oh, I think I made a mistake here. That had already been made in the Old Testament is somewhat uncomfortable proposition to swallow. So he makes the case, the rationalistic case of a scientist, and then at the last sentence, he says, well, but it was predicted. So,
Sure, sure. He's playing a devil's advocate by saying that, listen, if you compare this theory to the Indian astrology or Chinese mythology, it's all could be completely debunked. And he kind of tries to play as a truly a devil's advocate here.
Mary Louise von Franz, in her biography of Jung, she says this about Jung. She says that the reason Jung is so difficult to read is because he doesn't give a conclusion. He doesn't make his point, this is it. She says he circumambulates the point that he's discussing, looking at it from all possible angle, and lets the reader makes up his mind.
Sure, he's being a complete diplomat.
Well, no, Jung is a scientist.
Sure.
So he doesn't make the hypothesis. He lets you make the hypothesis.
On your
He
own.
gathers and gives you the information.
Hmm.
And yes, if you read between the lines and if you really pay attention, he makes his point of what he believes.
Hmm.
He always looks at all sides of the story and allows you to make up your mind. And if you think about it, that's a much more difficult, than somebody who straights out, that's the difference between Rudolf Steiner per se and Jung, is that Jung says, I don't know it for sure. You find out for yourself what the truth is. Whereas somebody like Rudolf Steiner says, this is it, and that's it. So then you're actually doing a religious movement
Sure,
versus a scientific exploration. And,
sure.
and that's what that word Gnostic means. Gnostics are a scientific approach to, the original Greek philosophers' approach to Christianity, that Gnosticism, wanting to understand. And he says that in essence, the moderns, they're Gnostics in their approach. Show me the money. Yeah, you're talking about God. Okay, give me a way to realize God. And Jung
Hmm.
says, okay, you start working with your dreams and you'll realize God and he'll become real for you. And so, and you're going to find your own truth through a practice
Hmm.
of active imagination. And
Because you are your own expression of God. And as you were speaking just now, it made me realize that perhaps because of his way of um, expressing and seeing it all around, I think that's perhaps is the beauty of the resonance in all of his work within us, because it jolts us to not specifically saying, stay in that corner, think this way, only see it from this corner's perception, don't look around, this is the truth. By doing all of that as a round, helps our psyche actually jolt in such a way that we begin to explore deeper and deeper within us. This could be the partially why, by reading this on with you, that I mean, for me, it has been profoundly interesting to see my evolution through the work.
that's the thing, is because Jung is so rigorous and so profound in his work, when you
Hmm.
read him, you're transformed by it.
Exactly.
It's
And
like,
think about it. Think of the word transform, right? Transform is circular. You're transforming rather than linear and direct.
and again, that's the zodiac. It's a process of
Exactly.
transformation.
Hmm.
And Jung says that the process of individuation is not a straight line,
Hmm.
it's a circle.
Hmm.
You keep circling around it till you figure it out.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
yeah, that was beautiful.
The labyrinth, image of the labyrinth, image of the mystical forest, all process of transformation and getting lost and coming back and going deeper and deeper into the woods.
The Tao
Absolutely.
symbol of the yin
Hmm.
and the yang,
Exactly.
the
Hmm.
all of the the Tibetan mandalas,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
so then we go into Jung's other parts of his work. We have one more slide to go. Ah, I did it again. I'm good. I think you know what that means. It means I'm getting tired when I make mistakes. But that was a hell of a journey we did.
We did. We
One
did.
take straight up, no editing, and no
What
technique.
you see is what you got.
That's right. Okay, this is, for those who may be interested in, when is the Age of Aquarius begins. So
Mhm.
this is the end of the chapter. The northerly or easterly fish, which the spring point entered about at the beginning of our era, is joining to the southerly or westerly fish by the so-called commissar. So when you
Mhm.
look at the fish symbol, you got one, the Pisces symbol, there's one fish and there's the second fish, and they're united by a string. This consists of a band of faint stars forming the middle sector of the constellation, and the spring point gradually moved along its southern edge. the point where the ecliptic intersects with the meridian of the tail of the second fish coincide roughly with the 15th century and the time of the Reformation, which, as we know, is so extraordinarily important for the history of Western symbols. Since then, the spring point has moved along the southern edge of the second fish and will enter Aquarius in the course of the third millennium. Astrologically interpreted, the designation of Christ as one of the fishes identifies him with the first fish, the vertical one. Christ is followed by the Antichrist at the end of time, the beginning of the enantodromia. This is one of my favorite words in the Jungian dictionary. Enantodromia. Secretly, you become that which you hate, or that which you fight. The beginning of the enantodromia would fall logically midway between the two fishes. We have seen that this is so. The time of the Renaissance begins in the immediate vicinity of the second fish, and when it comes, that spirit which culminates in the modern age. And in our previous video, we looked at that, the meaning of the Renaissance in terms of what happened to Christianity at that time and how it became really evil, that the Antichrist became, constellated in everything we did as moderns. And that was the beginning, really, the Renaissance. And again, if you're interested in this subject, look back at the previous video. But in the footnotes, this is what Jung writes. Since the delimitation of the constellations is known to be somewhat arbitrary, this date is very indefinite. So he's talking about the date of the beginning of the Age of Aquarius.
Correct. Yeah.
It refers to the actual constellations of the fixed stars, not to the zodion noeton, namely the zodiac divided into the sectors of 30 degrees. So these stars, where they are, and the Pisces and all of that, and then again the equinoctial point, the spring point,
Correct. Yeah.
what's moving through the zodiac.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like a defined point where we say, okay, it's in Pisces,
Mm-hmm.
And in other works, Jung talks about it differently as well. But, so this is a study of this point, and it's not definite.
Mm-hmm.
Astrologically, the beginning of the next eon, according to the starting point you select, falls between AD 2000 and 2200. Starting from the star 0 and assuming the Platonic month of 2,143 years, one would arrive at AD 2154 for the beginning of the Aquarian age. And at AD 1997, if you start from star A113. The later date agrees with the longitude of the stars told by Ptolemy in Ptolemy's Almagest. Ptolemy is a 3rd century astrologer in Egypt whose Tetrablio and his table of essential dignities still apply to this day. And he's basically, so what Jung says is that in Ptolemy's text and work, he would look at 2154 as the beginning of the Age of Aquarius. But if you look at some other way, you can see other stars, A113, whatever that means, would start in 1997. Then, there's all kinds of speculation elsewhere.
That's exactly it. Mm-hmm. Just the different types of speculation and I honestly think that if every one of us would do the inner work and start with ourselves, we will make a huge change in our collective unconsciousness. And we will only connect to the more power and more evolvements of our soul's existence in this life and every life that we come through.
I think that that's it. You put your finger on the pulse of the spirit of our times,
Amen. Amen.
the collective zeitgeist. Well,
Mhm.
that was fun, wasn't it?
Phenomenal. Absolutely phenomenal. I loved it. Absolutely loved it. But anyway, I eat this stuff for breakfast, so.
It was a long time coming, from
Hmm.
episode 5 to episode 6.
Yes, we
It
did
was
take a bit of a
well
break.
worth the look, and we need
Hmm.
to share that because that was a great study of,
Hmm.
Aeon. Now, the subsequent chapters, I think that we're going to do the next one on Nostradamus just because Nostradamus is such an important personality. And then
Hmm.
I think the rest of the book we're going to summarize and just pick out all the important parts
Sure, I'm with you. Hmm.
because then it gets into real technical Gnostic studies, and
Hmm.
but there are some pieces of gold in those
That are
chapters.
very good. Hmm.
And so I'll extract those, we'll extract those and make our next video after Nostradamus.
Hmm.
And then that will be the next, and then we'll have to think about that will finish this volume, and then we'll have to think of what's next.
Well, I've asked you what's next, but we still have to marinate on it.
Well, you want to do the the Mysterium Conjunctionis.
I do want to do that one, yes.
But this is like it's like postgraduate studies right off the bat.
Yes, I do. Go big or go home.
Well, all right,
And if these videos are making a ripple effect,
I'll make a deal with you.
okay,
We can do the Mysterium Conjunctionis.
okay,
If parallel to it, we can do on dream analysis.
sure, we can do dream analysis and then do the other one. Absolutely.
That's more work to you.
And what are we doing? We're trying to find shortcuts or something.
Well, that's what we've been talking about is taking our game to the next level, and we're doing that.
Exactly.
And you got to
Exactly.
watch a meeting of the heads for what's coming ahead for us.
Mhm.
Please, please, please tell your friends about this, share this, subscribe to the channel, comment, do all the, I call it massaging the algorithms. The more you engage with our work, the more it gets out. And Ina, that goes for you too.
Yes, it does.
And we'll all see you next time. Oh, let's share our information for those who want to know how to connect with us. We are real people that do real work, and we can contacted Ina at divineu.ca, info.divineu.ca is her email. And then Healer and the Dreamer Astrology on YouTube and Facebook, and also my website, which is in big need of update. And then my email address is spiritofthetimes108@gmail.com. Please do reach out to us personally. We do personal sessions for people, and we support people in their study of the work of astrology and
Mhm.
this beautiful work of Carl Jung. We The Healer and the Dreamer Astrology is my work, and in Ina, divine you, and you are divine, my dear.
Amen. Amen. And if anybody wants to reach out to us, and we can definitely feel comfortable recording their questions and their journey with us, we will definitely would like to share it with everyone because this is the work. it will only inspire everyone.
Hallelujah.
Hmm.
That was fun.
Woohoo!
See you next time. Whoop, whoop, whoop.